and welcome to No Notes, the show where three cerebral cinephiles take a break from chatting guilty pleasures to discuss cinematic treasures. Each month, we'll take turns selecting a film we believe to be virtually flawless, one that had a significant impact on our lives and/or helped shape the film lovers we became. If you love movies, if you really love movies, this is the show for you. My name is Stephanie, and I'm one of your hosts on this journey of great cinematic exploration. I'm joined by my two fellow film heads, Kelly and Jack.
All right, everybody. For my November No Notes pick, I wanted to pick a movie that was a little left of the center, which, to be honest, seems like a theme for No Notes lately. So I think a lot of people are like, well, why Memento? I mean, but why not this movie? Why not Memento? It is a perfect film. Duh. But seriously, every month that we go and we pick No Notes, it's a difficult debate, I think, for all of us. It just seems like we're always struggling with what to pick. Is it really a No Notes? Are we looking at something through rose-tinted glasses, and are we loving it? And are we going to get eviscerated by our co-hosts? You know, and it's kind of nerve-wracking in a way, because obviously you can look at some films and go, well, everybody loves those, right? That's a given. And you know, there are so many movies that I love that I can look at them objectively and identify where people, not necessarily you ladies, but just people in general, might have a problem with those movies, you know? And so I could say, hey, those are a No Notes film for me, but are they a No Notes film for the average moviegoer? But like I said, it seems like we're trending towards the lesser known films, and I'm on board with that. I think this is great. Will we one day cover classics like The Untouchables, Casablanca, and Seven? Of course we will. Absolutely. But most people have seen those movies many times over already. They're so ingrained into so many facets of our pop culture that they've taken on a much larger life than just a movie. So when it comes to No Notes, I feel like we have a good platform to gush about fantastic films that maybe a large chunk of moviegoers just haven't seen for whatever reason. They haven't come across these movies. And sometimes it's even us. Sometimes we haven't seen this movie that the other person picks, and we come away a better person after watching it, like with Pig. You know, so I just thought, hey, why not go for a movie that's a little left of the center, not as well known, that I think when I talk to people about movies and I talk about transformative movies or unique movies, a lot of folks have not seen this one, which I feel is kind of a crime. And I really thought it would be nice to jump on the bandwagon now for Memento before the inevitable remake, which has been in development hell for like since 2015. But at some point in time, because Hollywood does what Hollywood does, and heaven forbid they go with a new IP, so they're going to go back and remake this one, and it's just not going to be as good, because how could it be, right? So I wanted to get the word out there now that, hey, before that happens, whenever that's going to happen, you probably want to watch the original before that remake comes on and diminishes the experience. So reaching into my basket of perfect movies, I was like, this is one that a lot of people just haven't seen, which is kind of criminal. So I went with Memento.
Time now for the main event.
It's been a while since I've seen it, and having the chance to revisit it and being reminded of just how sort of special and incredible it is, it was a really, it was a gift. And I appreciate that you did pick something that maybe wouldn't have been as expected, but is such a delight.
Yep.
I guess we should say, before we get too far into it, that we are talking about a film that maybe people haven't discovered that we hope that they will discover. It will be hard to talk about this film in any sort of depth without spoiling it a bit. And
a lot.
part of the magic of this film is that, and I was just talking to a friend about this, kind of getting ready for this podcast, was the fact that I feel like no matter how smart and sophisticated you think you are, no matter how much of a person, if you're that person that's always like, oh yeah, I knew where this was going. I saw that coming. You know, like if you're always trying to predict where things are going and you feel like you always know how it's going to unfold, I feel like this is a film that's impossible to do. I don't
Agreed.
I don't know how anyone would know where this is going if they had not experienced it before. And that's part of what makes it so thrilling, is that you really are just along for the ride going like, what the hell is happening? Where is this going? What is going on? And that's magical. So we probably will need to like spoil plot points to talk about it. But I just wanted to say up top that this is really one of those movies that if you are interested in, you should stop this, like go watch the film and then come back and listen to us talk about it, because I don't want to ruin the experience for anyone, but I do want to talk in depth about it.
Yeah. And watch it with other people. It's one of those things, because most movies I watch alone. Totally fine with that. I go to the movie theater alone. I don't care. I have no shame. Mm-hmm. But this is one of those movies. This is one of those films that even if you don't like people, even if you're a total introvert, you want to watch this with friends or family that haven't seen it. Especially like you want to watch it and then you want to watch it again with them, because part of the joy of watching this movie with somebody else is watching them work through it. Because there's a lot of movies, even movies that are like quote unquote thinking movies, you know, it's a Hollywood thing. You kind of throw all the stuff up there, or the trailer already ruined everything. So a lot of quote unquote thinking movies really aren't thinking movies. But this one, more than any movie I can think of, like you can just sit back and watch as people work through it and the revelations come and they start to put two and two together, and the little bombs that get dropped throughout, and just seeing their reaction is part of the joy of a movie like this.
Kelly, had you seen this before? You have, right?
So many times. Honestly, this might actually be the No Notes movie I've seen the most times, because I think this is one of those movies that if you are a cinephile, once you discover it, you want to show it to people. Like you want to recommend it, but what's more, you want to be there when they see it. You want to experience it with them. So I saw this movie pretty shortly after it came out. I didn't see it in theaters. I don't think it got much of a wide release, and where I would only see things that were like relatively major studio films. But relatively shortly after it came out on DVD, I saw it and I was immediately obsessed and showed everybody, but like I wanted to watch it with them, because there's such joy in discovery with Memento. I think once you start to figure out what Christopher Nolan is doing, and when the final sort of like nail goes into the coffin, like that discovery about, you know, the diabetes and Sammy Jenkins and just the whole Guy Pearce has been lying to himself the entire time. Like it's so great. And it's such a like revelatory, brilliant moment. And it's been so fascinating, like getting ready for this episode. I was thinking about how this movie spawned so many shittier versions of it. Like this was absolutely one of those things that like it so recreated what we thought like a movie could be and what you could do with nonlinear storytelling and unreliable narrators, that so many movies tried to do the Memento thing and never managed to do it again. There's a lot of really careful work that Christopher Nolan did. I don't know how he storyboarded this out, or, you know, what the crazy like psychotic whiteboard in his bedroom looked like while he was trying to write this movie. But there's so much care taken to connect the threads throughout the sort of like, I don't know, what do we want to call them? Like the episodes or whatever, like, you know, each time segments. Period. Like, yes, exactly. Each segment, like there's so much care down to like, okay, what am I going to have him repeat this time? And, you know, like, how am I going to, it's just really, really brilliant. Especially for a movie that's dealing with the concept of memory and forgetfulness. And, you know, ironically, the movie doesn't forget anything. It remembers everything it's telling you and what is important to reiterate and what is important to maybe shift a little bit. And all of the threads connect perfectly, actually. And there are there are little clues that you can find if you watch it again. And once you know what it's doing, you can pay closer attention to those things. Whereas a movie, and I'm not saying this like as any kind of shade against people who enjoyed it, but a movie like The Sixth Sense, if you rewatch it, you're like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. Like the plot holes become glaring. And that first time, it's really, really fun to watch. And, you know, there's that like great revelatory moment, but like when you go back, it doesn't work really. Memento works. It absolutely works. Like you feel like, okay, not only do I understand why he did this non-linearly and, you know, reverse the chronology and everything, but like it actually improves the story and it makes it so that I can filter it in a different way. But I can see that like if it were played in just a conventional order, it would all absolutely work and it would all make perfect sense. And it's an unbelievable feat of writing and direction, and like just every part of the filmmaking comes together in a way that's so impressive and so structurally and technically impressive that I don't think I've ever seen anything quite match what I feel like he does structurally and technically in that movie.
Well, and what's interesting is when listening to and watching the film with the director's commentary, and he's talking about how Guy Pearce is one of the main reasons that so many segments of the film work, because Guy Pearce, he says, ironically, Guy Pearce has one hell of a memory. And so he would say, nope, that's not where I was. Nope, that's not right. That's not how that would work. And so this is one of those instances where, yes, the director had a vision and they held to it, but he had so much input from his actors, especially Guy Pearce, to kind of tie those together and to make sure that forward or backward, it all makes sense. And on the special edition DVD that Kelly and I have is a feature that you can literally watch the film in the normal order of a movie. It actually puts the film back in the order of a traditional film, start to finish. And watching it that way, it's, if you had no knowledge of what was going on, it would still be pretty damn gripping. It would be a very good story. But by running it backwards, not only does it kind of add another layer of tension, but it actually forces you into Leonard's mindset the entire time of the movie, because in film, where we watch them start to finish, all the previous events, we can recall them. We've just seen them. In this movie, there are no previous events to recall, because all the previous events are the past, are the future events. We're watching it backwards. So we're basically in his mindset for all of the color sequences of this movie. We're in his same mindset. He doesn't have any prior events to call back to. So neither do we. And I think that is just one of the genius moves of this film. The other thing that blows me away is that how tight this film is and how like narratively sound it is. They filmed this movie in 25 days. I mean, that's it. They had 25 days. They were rushing through almost every scene. They had to rush one take. That's all they got. Two takes. That's all they got. I mean, this was like guerrilla filmmaking almost, if you will. And yet none of that translates to the screen. You would not know that they were so rushed.
Right. And obviously Christopher Nolan deserves an enormous amount of the credit for that. But it goes back to, like you were saying, Jack, about Guy Pearce, like to be an actor who could do what he did without the benefit of having like infinite Kubrickian takes. There's this little touch he does that I still use pretty often when I like stay in a hotel room or something, where a few times he says about the standard Gideon Bible, which I read religiously, of course. And like, he does this little chuckle but he delivers it the same way every time, which is amazing. Cause like he has it down to like, this is a joke he tells all the time, but he thinks he's doing it the first time each time. And it's so good. Besides being like a genuinely pretty good joke, like pretty solid joke. The way that he delivers that the same every time is so brilliant. And that's something that only an actor you can have like absolute faith in could do.
You know, what's interesting when reading through like the history of this film is who they actually wanted for the role was Brad Pitt. And Brad Pitt was actually on board. He was going to star in this movie, but scheduling conflicts kind of forced him out of it. And then it was at that point where they were like, you know what, we could make this movie for less with, a reliable, quote unquote, unknown actor. We don't need a big name actor in this movie. And actually that might be detrimental to the film, so they ended up.
I think it would have distracted.
Agreed. I think so too. So I think in a roundabout sort of way, this luck of the draw kind of thing that, Brad Pitt's fucking awesome, but he's not in the movie. And so then you get a guy like Guy Pearce, who is a very good actor, but still not very well known. And, he gets to come in and just basically own the movie start to finish. It was, fantastic. So I thought that was kind of cool, little like a lucky take that I think that this film, it worked out better by not having Brad Pitt in it, which I would not say that about a lot of movies, but this one, absolutely.
I think also Brad Pitt's look would be kind of distracting, to be honest. He's so like movie star looking, and Guy Pearce is a good looking guy, but he's not like as glammed out, and he's always just a tiny bit gaunt. And that works extremely well for Leonard's character, like to look as tortured and haunted as he does. Whereas I feel like Brad Pitt looks glamorous, in addition to the fact that he's one of those actors who's reached a level of celebrity that I feel like it's very, very hard to divorce yourself from the fact that you're watching Brad Pitt.
Right.
In the same way that, like, you know, Tom Cruise, when Tom Cruise is on screen, you're like, okay, I mean, I guess he's doing a pretty good job, but I'm just looking at Tom Cruise.
I'm just watching Tom Cruise be Tom Cruise. Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel kind of the same way about Brad Pitt. Whereas like Guy Pearce, I feel like genuinely, like, maybe some of it's because he hasn't achieved that level of like mainstream appeal. And maybe some of it's just that he's just that goddamn good. I feel like he really does actually like disappear into his roles.
Yeah.
One of the things, you know, I recently picked Only Lovers Left Alive. And one of the things that you'll probably hear me say a lot that really draws me to certain films is what it has to say about what it means to be human. I love films that explore what makes us human. And this, which Only Lovers Left Alive does in a really beautiful and profound way, but this one does also in a way that I think you might not necessarily get like upon first watch, unless you're somebody like me who like always digs really deep into everything. But the idea that, first of all, it plays with the idea of perception and perception being reality. And if perception is wrong, then is reality wrong? Or can reality ever be wrong? Is it all just the lens through which we view things from? And, you know, when I took a lot of philosophy when I was in college, and I was completely obsessed with it. And I have been lifelong obsessed with the idea about, is there objective reality? Is there objective morality? Like, is there something that is always true, or is everything colored by how we view the world and the baggage that we bring into our perception of things, and the way that our brains process things? And when you have the idea of having a broken brain that isn't working the way that it's supposed to work, and therefore you don't have the same perspective of reality that you otherwise would have and should have. And if you think about the idea of us really, like, what makes us who we are, is it really just a sum of our memories and like how we've experienced the world and how we've interpreted that? And if that's broken, then what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to like interact with the world? And what does it mean to, what does reality mean when your perception of reality is so fundamentally flawed? I find that like deeply like philosophical and thought-provoking and completely compelling. And it's something that I won't, trust me, but like I could talk about that for hours and hours, because it's just so, it's so fucking fascinating what it has to say about just the nature of reality and the nature of how we interact with the world. And I'll shut up now.
I think
that. You're right.
You should never shut up. Yeah. I think that philosophically, it's also like a really interesting, at the end, Leonard says something, and I'm paraphrasing here, about, you know, we all tell ourselves stories to get through. And I think, you know, the movie poses this really interesting question about like, at what point Leonard chooses a lie. Because there is a point at the end where it's an active decision, where he knows that he can reset his brain, and he's going to. And instead of writing notes or leaving, you know, something to indicate to him the reality of what happened, he says something like, well, I'm going to tell another story, or something like that. I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but the idea that like we choose our narratives and we get to decide the stories that we tell, but also, you know, like is in some ways like normal, just everyday life, the reality of things just too mundane. And so we kind of create these more fantastic, you know, or too painful, or too, you know, guilt inducing, you know, so we create something. And he's not even just creating like an alternate to his own guilt. He's creating an adventure. He's creating a pursuit, a mission.
He's giving himself
and
purpose.
Like, exactly. And you can get into the kind of complicated philosophical question then, though, of if it's a purpose you create that's based on a lie, is that like, it's almost nihilistic in a way.
But then it's like, it begs the question, like, but is it a lie? Because then it's like, there has to be objective truth. But if you don't have any memories, and you don't have any, like, your understanding of the world is on shaky foundation, because you don't have, you don't know what just happened a few minutes ago. So everything is like constantly resetting. And so the experiences that you're having, you are having them, but you're not having them because you never retain them. So you're constantly revisiting them. So I guess the question is like, you creating your own reality in that, aren't we all always creating our own reality? And is there such a thing as living a lie if you're just living your truth? Does that actually become the truth? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, there's a whole section in that movie where they talk about that, where they're actually in the diner and they're talking about that, where he's saying, memory isn't even that good. Memory is flawed. Mm-hmm. Memory is personal. And I think a lot of folks, if you really start to think about it, absolutely that is true. If you look at past events and you talk to family, you talk to friends that were there and you're like, well, this happened. They're like, no, it didn't. You're like, yeah, it did, and your perception of it is completely different than their perception of it, but it's based, all your memory, whether it's accurate or not, has fixated that thing and anchored that part of that event in your life in a certain way that has then kind of directed how you talk about it and view it, and maybe things you took away from something that transpired a completely different way for somebody else. So I think it is kind of an interesting look at what constitutes fact. What is memory? What is our truth? Is our truth a truth, or is it a very, very highly stylistic version of the truth that we have put upon ourselves? And it's absolutely that.
Mm-hmm. That's why it's kind of telling, though, at the end when Leonard kind of has that moment where he's like, okay, this is really what happened, after Joey Pants tells him, because he doesn't remember it. He's just kind of being given cold, hard evidence and realizing like, okay, this is the truth and it's the truth I don't want. So I'm going to let myself forget it and create a new truth.
And I feel like
it's interesting. Go ahead, Steph.
No, I was just going to say, I kind of feel like, obviously we do that to lesser degrees than what's happening in this movie, because we do have our memories and we do, like, on some level at least understand when we're making those choices to live in denial a little bit. But I feel like that so many of us do that on a regular basis, at least on some level of like rewriting that narrative and choosing what we're going to believe and choosing the story that we're going to tell ourselves. And how much of mental health is that too, as well as like, therapists always say your brain lies to you. Don't listen to it. Like it'll tell you that nobody loves you, that you're no good, that all these things that aren't true, but are like what your brain are telling you, but they become true because what other frame of reference do you have other than what's inside your own head? So if what's inside your own head is a lie, then what does truth even mean? Can it even exist, or does it even matter if it exists? Because all you have is the stories that you tell yourself.
Yeah. Agreed.
I think the movie is very smart in that it doesn't really assign any value one way or the other to Leonard's actions. It doesn't condemn him for them, really. Like even the moment where like, okay, he's actively making a decision, because so much of what happens is kind of passive for him. He's based on tattoos and what other people tell him. And there's the whole like really heartbreaking bit with Carrie-Anne Moss where she says something like, I'm going to be really shitty to you, but you're going to forget it in 5 minutes and we'll be best friends again anyway, or something like that. All of which puts him in this kind of passive position where he's sort of has to rely on people, even though like he doesn't exactly trust anybody. So like the most active thing he does in some ways is that moment where he decides that he's going to sort of rewrite the narrative. But I don't feel like Nolan is suggesting that he's condemning Leonard for that at all. I think he's just kind of taking a really neutral stance on it.
Mm-hmm. And also, I just wanted to say, because you kind of brought this up just now, one of the things that I took away, especially in this viewing, was the fact that every single person he encounters is taking advantage of him in some way.
Yes. Yep.
And what that says again about human nature and the fact that, how willing we are to exploit weaknesses because we can, whether it's a small exploitation or a larger one. That really sort of broke my heart this time around watching it, of just like, there's not one single person in this entire film that is truly on his side and truly has his back and is going to make sure he's okay and has the right information and has the right, support to get through his life. And that's really, I don't know, I found that pretty devastating, but not necessarily. I guess it is a bit nihilistic because it's not a great representation of human nature, but it also feels very sincere.
It's kind of darkly humorous.
That's really sad. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
This time around, this is gonna. Oh, no, please, Jack, go ahead. I'll come back.
No, I was just going to say, it's just funny when he's like, how many rooms am I checked into in this shitty hotel? You know, and the guy's like, just 2 for now. You know, it's just, you know, and you know, listening to the commentary where he's like, you know, this is, if you had no moments of levity whatsoever, then this movie would be so goddamn bleak, you know, and it's, he's like, we have to have that moment of levity because, you know, partly because we need to lighten it up a little bit, but partly because Leonard has developed these methods of dealing with people who he meets for the first time every time, you know, and some of it is what he learned from Sammy Jenkins, where you kind of look at somebody with a hint of recognition. It's fake. It's not real. You don't recognize that person, but you kind of learn to react in a certain way to mitigate some of that uncomfortableness that, you know, and it's interesting how it's, you know, everybody he's dealing with, he's meeting for the first time, but they've been fucking him over since day one. And it's very darkly humorous. It's sad, but it kind of, I don't know, just bleakly sad, and makes you kind of chuckle and shake your head at the same time. It's like, yeah, of course they are. Because of course they are.
Well, and giving Leonard like those little moments of his own bits of humor, little bits of dark humor, and even giving him his kind of weirdly trusting nature, even though he really shouldn't trust anybody, is a really great way of humanizing a character who we're told has no memories. So we don't have a whole lot to like base his characterization on other than these little bits of his internal monologue. And I think it works really, really well. Like the empathy you feel for him is pretty automatic. Like it doesn't take long for you to be on his side. And some of that is just that Guy Pearce has a really like open face, I think, that you feel like, oh, I feel like I can trust this person. And that was the point I was kind of getting into, which is that this time around, I noticed that I would have never, ever compared these two actors in a million years, but Stephen Tobolowsky is basically playing Guy Pearce, just a different version of Guy Pearce. Sammy Jenkins is just, you know, Leonard. And thinking about it, they actually do have a certain similar, like wide-eyed kind of innocence in this, like a sort of like open-faced sadness that broke my heart for both of them. And I thought that's actually a kind of brilliant bit of casting. They do kind of work as different versions of each other.
What I find interesting is that it was Carrie Ann Moss that recommended Joe Pantoliano for the part of Teddy, which is funny because they wanted Dennis Leary. He was unavailable, thankfully. But I think it's interesting. I can
see that as a comparison, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's funny when you listen to the commentary of the movie where they're saying that, you know, Joe coming into this movie was the villain in Bound. He was the villain, one of the villains in The Matrix, right? So every you know, everybody who's seen movies, especially with The Matrix, we already associate him with a bad guy, right? And so, yes, in this film, is he a good guy? No, he's not. He's a bad guy. He's taking advantage of Leonard, just like everybody else is. But when he's talking about what's going on in the movie, when he's explaining kind of the situations to Leonard, he's actually being the most honest, which I find funny, is that they cast him knowing that people were going to say, oh, he's the villain, can't trust him. And it's like, yeah, I mean, he's a shitty dude, but when he's talking about all this stuff, the vast majority of it, either he's projecting stuff that he's saying, or he's actually not bullshitting Leonard at all. It's like almost everything he says in a way is true. It's like he's almost the most honest person, you know.
That was my takeaway, honestly. That like he's kind of a shitty guy. He's kind of skeezy, but like I took him at his word when he said like the first few times that you did this, I genuinely wanted to help you. But like now we've done it so many times, you know, I took him at his word. Maybe that's naive of me. I don't know. But it seemed to me like it rung true because he didn't stand to gain anything from lying at that point. Like,
exactly. Yep.
I thought he was great too, by the way. I mean, everybody 100%. In the movie is fantastic, but like, I feel like Dennis Leary would have maybe been too kind of snarky and sarcastic, and
he'd have been too Dennis Leary.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought Joey Pants was great. Like, I really felt like he adds a tiny bit of levity that's helpful. Like when he says it's beer o'clock and I'm buying, like that's a pretty funny thing to say. But also like he has just enough kind of humanity that you can feel like, okay, yeah, this guy is an asshole. But when it comes out that it maybe at some point he genuinely wanted to help Leonard, you're like, okay, I believe it. I feel like if Dennis Leary said that, I would be like, nah, I don't buy it.
Pretty much. Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that for this film, you really, I mean, for it to work as well as it does, you really do need to you can't be certain about anybody's intentions. You can't be certain about anything because Leonard's not certain about anything, and you're in his perspective. So you can't have anybody who's like, you don't want any overt villains. You don't want anybody who shows their cards. You want to be able to sit there and think like what's happening? Is this person on their side? Is he lying to him? Is he manipulating him? Like, what is happening? And I think that's the performances are so powerful because you really could go either way. Like, you just are confused throughout the entire film, and you're supposed to be confused, and you really are channeling Leonard's confusion in a way that, like, this film does such a beautiful job of immersing you so deeply into a character's mindset and making you feel everything that they're feeling and understand how confusing and scary and unnerving and disorienting it would be if you woke up every day without memories. Like, what would that be like to try to like exist in the world and to try to navigate human relations? It's hard enough when you do have memories to try to know like what people are up to and if they are, you know, well-intentioned or not. And when you don't have anything to go on, that's just like, I can't even imagine it. It makes this film so powerful.
The first time I saw it, when Carrie-Anne Moss has her heel turn, I was so jarred and shocked and like just completely rocked to my core. Like, I was not ready for it at all. And like, they don't build up to it so much as like, it's just in its entire own little chapter. So you haven't seen any of this bleed through at this point. And it's just so shocking. It was so shocking to me, like such a genuinely like, oh my God moment.
Well, especially because they talk about it where it's like very rarely do they cut away from Leonard. I mean, this movie is Leonard. Even when it's Sammy, it's Leonard. The only time they really ever cut away from Leonard is to show her in bed when she's kind of leaning over and touching where he was, where her boyfriend would have been, you know, and kind of giving her that little bit of humanity before 5 minutes later dropping that A-bomb, you know. So it's interesting how they kind of specifically did that, because you're right, it comes out of nowhere. You don't really expect it. I mean, you know something's up, but you don't know that's what's going to happen, you know. But they kind of play into that a little more than other characters by giving her that moment of like stark humanity where she's at this vulnerable spot. And so you're like, no, there's no way. And then she does it. And you're like, holy shit, you know. So kudos for them to kind of step outside of the flow of the film, if you will, to give somebody else just a few seconds of additional alone screen time to really drive that point home and to make it as shocking as it was.
You know, and it really sets up, there's like a philosophical moral quandary question of like, what would you do if there was absolutely no consequences? If you could do anything you wanted, knowing that there would be zero consequences for your actions, what would you do? Would you take advantage of that? And it's sort of like, you know, the purge and that setup of like, what do we do when all of our, like, how much of what we do, how much of our innate air quotes goodness is that we're a part of society and it's a social construct and there's consequences for our actions, and you know, we don't want to reap those consequences, so we behave well to avoid them. And this is really setting that up, because with Leonard there sort of are no consequences because he has no memory, and these characters are playing with that of like, I can say anything I want to you, I can do anything I want to you, and you won't be any wiser. So if I want to, like, you know, get out all my rage, if I want to be a complete asshole, if I, you know, then tomorrow I can go back to being sweet as pie, and there's no consequences. And how much of us is actually good or bad, or are we just like playing a part? And what happens when you strip away consequences and you're interacting with somebody who has no memory of who you are and what you're doing? And I think they do a really good job of not creating. There's no real villains in the way that most films do villains, where they're really one-dimensional and they're just like evil and malintentioned. There's just complicated people who are in situations that most of us would never be in, that are very strange and unusual, that maybe bring out something that otherwise remains dormant because there would be consequences for your actions.
Yeah.
I also think like it's an amazing feat of filmmaking and something that really Christopher Nolan deserves a lot of credit for, that the most suspense and the most tense moment in the movie in a lot of ways is just Leonard looking for a pen while he's trying to remember to write down, you know, and they show like earlier in the scene, she's moving all the pens and you're like, what is she doing? Like, why is she taking away all the pens? And hiding them, like putting them in a desk or something, if I remember correctly. And then that reveal that like, okay, it's so that he can't find it. And the entire time, like you're hoping he can figure out a way to write this down, to remind himself. And she just waits it out perfectly. And then it's gone. And like, but it's, in some ways, I think that's the most tense moment in the movie. Like just Leonard telling himself, don't forget, just find a pen, don't forget, and not being able to find a pen. And to make that like such a tense, such a truly like fraught moment, that takes a lot of skill. As a person who's constantly looking for pens, and it's not that exciting, I promise you.
But also to have her sitting in the car and just sitting there, she's just waiting, you know, and it's like, holy shit, she's not a villain in a traditional sense, but in that moment, she's pretty close to a villain. No, pretty much. Yeah.
She's pretty villainous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely an act of cruelty for sure. And you know, again, not to belabor this point, but you know, once you like know how all the pieces fit together and you rewatch it, and then you see how things are set up so masterfully, and it's brilliant, and there's so much attention to detail. But when you watch this cold, like even though there are signs and there are things that sort of point you in the direction we're going, like you don't see them, or at least I don't. Maybe I'm not the brightest, but I feel like the way that this is set up is that it's all very surprising, and it's only like in retrospect that you're like, oh shit, like this is what they were setting up, and this is what was happening, and this is how all the pieces were fitting together. But when you're in the moment, you're really in a state of like everything shocks you so much, and it's so effective. Like her turn and what happens there is so shocking. And I guess in retrospect, you could be like, I guess I could see that coming, but I couldn't when I was watching it. I was really just surprised at every turn in a really delightful, beautiful way.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have this thing that my favorite thing that a book or a movie or a show can do is that they tell you exactly what they're doing the entire time, but you're still surprised when it is when the grand picture is revealed. Sometimes it's too overt, like it seems like it's too on the nose or whatever, but like there's something that's so satisfying when they've actually been telling you the entire time what they've been doing, and still it feels like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like what an amazing reveal. And I feel like Memento is one of those movies that the entire time it actually tells you like exactly what it's doing. And, you know, it's not like some sort of like a ridiculous unearned twist or anything like that. The entire time it's setting up what it's doing and telling you what it's doing. And still at the end, you're like, oh, holy shit. And that's the beauty of it, that like, because it has been spending the entire movie establishing itself and saying like, look, this is what we're doing. We're playing with memory. We're erasing memory as we go. We're rewriting memory. We're recreating. We're telling new stories. Like at the end, when it basically says, hey, guess what? Exactly what we've said the entire movie turns out to be accurate. It still feels shocking, you know, in a really refreshing way, I think.
Well, and I think it does a really... Oh, sorry, Jack. I'll just say this really fast.
Go ahead.
I think it's a really interesting... It's talking about perception and what's real. And it's not just saying it. It's like showing you that. It's putting you in the position of... There's a reality that's happening, right? But all you're seeing is what you're seeing. All you're seeing is like kind of what you want to see through your lens, through your sort of narrow perception. Even though all this stuff is happening all around you and it's all telling a story and it's all true and real, your perception is shaped by what you're experiencing in the moment, which is, you know, sharing sort of Leonard's perception. And how much of life is that, you know, there is like stuff that's real and there's information that's happening all the time that's all around you, but you're not taking it all in all the time. You're taking in a very limited amount of that information, and you're making choices and decisions based on that very narrow bit of information. and how sort of like a little bit unsettling that is as well. That's how we make massive life choices based on like really a pretty narrow frame of reference. And we all do that. And I think this film does such a good job of sort of exploiting that and exploring it.
Well, yeah. And to that end too, Steph, like, oh, I'm sorry, Jack, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kelly. Go ahead. You're good.
Are you sure?
Let Jack.
I'll try.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I'll try and be really quick about this.
You're fine.
To that end, Steph, like we also, as a viewer, we take Leonard at his word the entire time. Like our viewpoint is so narrow in the movie because he's our narrative character. He's our viewpoint character. But like, as it goes on, it reveals like how little Leonard knows, and that Leonard is, whether willfully or accidentally, deceiving us as the viewers with the Sammy Jenkins story. And I think that that's similar to what you're saying in some ways, in that like the idea that like we're kind of myopic. There's all this stuff going on outside, and there's so much going on outside of Leonard that's impacting him. But like we're trained as viewers to trust our point of view character, and he's not actually trustworthy because he can't be. Like it's not really his fault, but because of the nature of his disability, we have to just trust what he says from minute to minute, and what he sees and says from minute to minute changes because the information changes.
When they talk about it too, where he's got this big packet of information, right? He's got all these case files, he has all this stuff. And they were even saying he has almost everything he needs to know what really happened and to know that things have already gone. He's already gone down that road, but he can't get from start to finish through any of it because it's so fragmented and it's all out of order. He'll never find answers, even though he has most of the answers in his hands. He'll never find the answers because he can't pay attention long enough to get through all the information that he has. But I wanted to touch on.
But also, does he want to?
No, at the end,
like,
he doesn't want to.
I think right. Like I feel like that's part of it too. Like, I'm sorry, Jack. Go.
No, I wanted to touch on what you guys were saying, because there's this thing in the military, and then by extension in the civilian world, where we're going to tell you what we're going to tell you, we're going to tell it to you, and then we're going to tell you what we told you. Which is, if you if you make that macro, then that's filmmaking as a whole, right? We're gonna give you the build up, we're gonna have the thing, and then we're gonna talk about what happened. And I think even though this movie does all that, I think it takes a certain kind of filmmaker to give you enough clues where that does transpire. To Steph's point, I mean, most of the clues are there, but we're so trained as an audience, to your point, to not see them. So it takes a special filmmaker to be able to do all that, and yet it still be a surprise, where a lot of films, it's like, yeah, I saw that coming a mile away, because obviously we are trained as an audience to look for the things that we're familiar with and look for the expectations. And this movie plays with those expectations and those perceptions in such a way that they're there, but you don't know to look for them, or you dismiss them. And there's, I think, very few filmmakers that could pull that off, on a small or large budget.
How do you think, what is your takeaway with the end of this film? And do you think there's anything hopeful in it? Like, do you think there is something sort of beautiful about the fact that like you can write your own story? Or do you find it very nihilistic and bleak? How do you interpret it?
Oh, I find it both. I actually think it's somehow both simultaneously, which I know seems like it's an oxymoron, but I absolutely think there's something I think there's absolutely something kind of hopeful about the idea of, we all tell ourselves stories to get through, and we get to choose those stories to some extent. And even in its own weird, scrappy way, the idea that Leonard wants to have a reason, he wants to have a purpose, so he creates it. And like, yeah, I think there is something that's genuinely kind of beautiful to, well, I'll make my own purpose. If it's not in the world, I'll make it myself. I also think that there is something that's a little bit nihilistic about like your purpose is based on self-deception, but
and murder.
I and murder, also murder. Let's not forget the murder. But I do think it's somehow both at the same time.
It's I think in this way, it's not so nihilistic as it is just kind of sad that here's a character who is kind of literally stuck in time. Now, he does choose at times to perpetuate that, but he can't move on because there is no moving on, because he can't remember to move on, and So it's in a way, I don't know that it's nihilistic so much as, I mean, it is kind of a condemnation of humanity as a whole when you look at most of the characters in this movie. But I think it's more just it's kind of a depressing, sad look at somebody who is trying to find purpose, and his purpose is to be an avenging hero for a dead wife that really didn't die by anybody's hand but his, and so in his grief, he created this, fractured reality on top of an already fractured reality that he can't help, and so
right. But there's a moment,
it's complicated.
There's a point where he makes an active choice.
Oh, for sure.
Like where he makes a decision and he chooses to hold on to the fantasy, the fiction of nobility and vengeance. And, that's sort of like, I don't even know what to call it, but like that is an active choice at the end. But I guess who knows how many times he's made that active choice. Like, That's the thing. We've only seen this one episode of it. So maybe he's done this multiple times. Maybe Joey Pants has told him more than once, like, okay, write it down, get it tattooed, you did it. You did the thing. So like, as far as we know of, Leonard may have done this multiple times. And every time he has made the decision that he knows his memory is going to reset and he's going to start the pattern over again. And that's a choice that he makes.
But I guess
is that not like a nature of humanity or self-destruct?
It might very well be,
Well, he's also in a situation where he has a choice. We all always have a choice, but like, how much of a choice does he have? Because without this purpose that he's creating, he has literally nothing. Like, he has emptiness, and that's pretty bleak as well. And I think so much of our purpose for us normal folk, our purpose is centers around our interpersonal relationships and how we affect other people and how they affect us. And so we're doing things for people we love, or we're doing things for, a legacy, or we're doing something, we want to be known or remembered or whatever, like whether it's selfish reasons or not. I mean, I think everything's inherently a little selfish. But he has none of that. Like, he can't have any validation. He can't really have any relationships. He doesn't have a legacy really that's going to matter to him whatsoever. So like, stripped of everything that makes us really human and gets us out of bed in the morning and gives us some kind of purpose. It's like, on one hand, what he's doing isn't like the greatest choice, I guess, but it's like certainly one you can empathize with and understand, because like, what else do you have?
Right. That's why I said no condemnation. Just no, that's okay. I'm not judging him on that. I'm just saying, like, if as an assessment of it.
Right.
And to return to the nihilistic aspect, I feel like what you just said kind of supports my theory that it is a bit nihilistic, because that's a little nihilistic of like, well, I have to make up this thing to make purpose, like that's understandable and fine. But like you said, he's got nothing else. Like, without the permanence of memory and without, any kind of connections, it's all he has is this fiction he's created. That's it. He's got like half a memory of his wife and this fiction.
I mean, obviously, this is one that we could talk about for so long, because there is so much to unpack. And it's one of those films that, I think I said this for Only Lovers as well. It's the perfect film because you can just watch it and just be immersed in the performances and the brilliant writing and the creative narrative structure and what it's doing cinematically, and you can just watch it on that level, and it's so compelling. But then if you want to watch it on this deeper level and really think about, like, all right, what is this saying about memory and identity and purpose and self-worth and all of these things, and it has so much there to unpack, but it's never preachy or heavy-handed. It's not trying to be like, look how self-important this film is, look how highfalutin. It's really just sort of perfect on every level and hits all these beats, and it gives you so much to unpack if you want to unpack it. But if you don't, if you just want to watch it straight, like, it's fucking brilliant just as a film, just if you're looking for appreciating how a film is constructed and how the art of filmmaking, it's so breathtaking on that level. Especially if you're a film noir lover, where you can say this is kind of the ultimate modern film noir, where all of the elements are there, but they're all shuffled. Where they're saying, like, where normally most film noir would start out with him in the
in the hotel room with the bottle of liquor or with the gun in the nightstand and the bruised, beat up guy in the closet. And that's how a film noir would start, right? A classic film noir would start, and we'd have to pick up the pieces. Where this one, that happens in the middle of the movie, and they're like, yeah, this is like the ultimate like shuffling of a film noir, where it stays a film noir, and all the elements are there. You've got your femme fatale, you've got all the pieces in place, but they're all out of order, and yet it still works, start to finish. It still works, even though they're shuffled. And I thought that was like, that's a perfect encapsulation of this movie, because I love film noir and I love movies that kind of deconstruct film noir. This one kind of does both. It honors it while deconstructing it, while shuffling the deck. There's no other movie like it. I can't think of a single other movie. I mean, sure, Pulp Fiction did the out of sequence stuff before, right? And it's not that other movies hadn't done this out of sequence, but back to front like this, I can't think of another movie that dared to do this and then did it in such a way that was so impactful, and yet also something that you could follow. Where to be like Tenet, which kind of explores somewhat similar themes, is very difficult to follow, where Memento really isn't. I mean, as long as you're just watching, as long as you're even paying partial attention, it's not difficult to follow at all.
I agree completely. I think that what you were saying about deconstructing it while honoring it, the closest comparison I can think of is sort of like the Coen brothers, because I feel like a lot of times they do movies that are sort of deconstructions of the genres they're exploring, while also just being the best possible version of those movies. I feel like, the Hudsucker Proxy is sort of like a throwback to the screwball movies of the 30s, while also actually just being a really good example of that. And I think that that's the same way with Memento, with noir, that like it does kind of deconstruct the genre, but it's also just like the perfect example of the genre, which is a really hard thing to do that kind of like loving homage and recreation at the same time is really quite a magic trick.
Agreed.
Continuing the theme of things that are slightly lighter about it, there is an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine that is an homage to Memento, where Jason Mantzoukas, at his unhinged best, has the Memento disorder. And Andy Samberg's character keeps referring to it as the Memento disorder, but nobody knows it as that. They keep calling it the Finding Dory disease. And so whenever I think of Memento now, I think of people just saying it's the Finding Dory disease.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is Kelly, way to like, after all of this bleak, heavy conversation, way to like end on this like delightful note. I'm 100% serious. So good.
I can always add a welcome infusion of nonsense. That's what I bring to the table.
I love what you bring.
I like it. I like that we kind of peaked right there. It's like, that's good.
And now for our closing arguments.
Christopher Nolan's 2000 masterpiece continues to challenge the boundaries of narrative cinema and solidify its place as one of the most innovative films of the modern era. If there's a single word that captures Memento's enduring brilliance, it's disruption. Nolan disrupts traditional notions of storytelling, memory, and identity to craft a film that is not only gripping, but also deeply philosophical. It's a cinematic riddle that engages the mind and stirs the soul. Its technical achievements, Guy Pearce's haunting performance, the crisp cinematography, the atmospheric score, they're all flawless. But it's Nolan's audacity as a storyteller that elevates this film into the pantheon of great cinema. What makes this film timeless is its ability to provoke. It's a film that refuses to hand the audience neat answers, instead inviting us to wrestle with its ambiguity. It's also a film that rewards repeat viewings, each time revealing new layers of meaning. The backward narrative, initially disorienting, becomes a profound metaphor for the ways in which we reconstruct the past. How memory is less a window to truth and more a collage of fragmented impressions. Memento remains a touchstone for creativity and originality. It's a masterclass in form and function working in harmony. It doesn't just tell a story. It uses the medium of film to place us inside the mind of the protagonist, to make us feel his confusion, his desperation, his longing for closure. To watch Memento is to grapple with some of the most profound questions of human existence. How do we define ourselves? Can we trust what we remember? And when truth becomes ungraspable, do we create meaning through lies? These are timeless themes rendered with stunning originality. And for these reasons, I believe Memento is a landmark, a bold declaration of what cinema can achieve when it embraces complexity and dares to challenge its audience. Absolutely, positively, no notes.
So I'm not going to be a third as eloquent as Steph was, but I will say that Memento was an incredibly formative movie for me. I saw it relatively young, and it shaped a lot of what I came to hope for and want from cinema. I think that it's a movie that rewards rewatch in a way that many don't. The care and attention to detail Christopher Nolan put into it is astonishing and defies the nonlinear nature of the film. I also think that it's as good as Christopher Nolan gets. I think that he kind of chased that high with larger budgets and never quite managed to top it. It is a movie that launched 1,000 or at very least tens of imitators that never managed to do what he did well. And I have never gotten tired of watching it all of these years later, or more importantly, or at least equally importantly, watching it through other people's eyes. It is 100% no notes. Jack, thank you.
Oof, my pleasure. So, I mean, as we've just expounded over the last hour and a half, that this is the perfect movie. I mean, but there's so many reasons why it could be viewed as that. You know, to I think Steph's point earlier on, if you just watch this movie as a movie and you don't take anything else further from it, it is an engaging thriller that could just stand on its own. But it does have a lot to say about the nature of humanity, and it's probably the only movie I can think of that really accurately portrays memory in all of its various stages. Where it's you looking back through Leonard's eyes at his history before he lost his short-term memory, where he's looking back on his life prior, and it's not all good things. I mean, it's mostly good things, but there's kind of a bittersweet angle to his memory, and I think that's really kind of a truth where a lot of films will over saccharine a memory, especially of a male character, to his female person in his life, whether it was his wife or daughter or mother, whatever the impetus of the film is. There's always this over reliance on saccharine moments, and this movie doesn't do that because that's not how real memory works. And as far as portrayal of actual memory issues and the way that memory actually works, this movie kind of calls it out and shows that that's not true. This is how memory actually works. Memory isn't perfect. And so on so many levels, this movie does so many things right. It is just a great thriller. It is a great kind of, examination of human nature. It is a very powerful portrayal and deconstruction of memory. It was one of these movies that everybody in it, but a lot of people still haven't seen it. And it's a true shame because everybody's going to walk away from this movie thinking something different, which is not, unique to this movie per se, but this movie more than any other I can think of, you can walk away from it with completely wildly different takes on it, having seen the same film. And again, that is accurate to the movie where memory isn't perfect. We make our own truth. And I think this movie kind of captures that very powerfully. So, in the pantheon of movies that make you think, but also entertain you, this is truly one of the best. And honestly, start to finish, no notes.
Bravo! Bravo! Bravo!
Well, that is our show, folks. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoy this foray into film passion. If you liked what you heard, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on iTunes. That really helps more people discover us, and we would greatly appreciate it. And remember, in a mad, mad world, movies help remind us of our humanity and capacity for great beauty. Film criticism is important, but film celebration is essential. Until next time, take note of the movies that matter and join us in proudly proclaiming no notes.
You know what? I don't want any rapey trees though. So I'm gonna not do that in the cabin in the woods. You know.
All right, fair enough. Yeah.
I feel like that's not the default. I feel like you don't.
I know. I
get rapey
Well, what
trees.
is the default, Steph? In your expert opinion, what is the default?
I was thinking like Cthulhu or something like that.